And welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. It's my honor and privilege today to have Brett McCracken here today. Brett, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing great.
Thanks for having me.
Listeners may be familiar with Brett's work. He's a senior editor and director of communications for the Gospel Coalition. He's the author of several books. The ones we'll be talking about today would be The Wisdom Pyramid, Feeding Your Soul in a Post-Truth World, and then Uncomfortable, The Awkward and Essential Challenge of Christian Community. He's written for the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Huffington Post, CNN.com, Christianity Today, and many other publications. Graduate of Wheaton and also UCLA. And most recently, I was able to attend the Gospel Coalition conference in Indianapolis, which was amazing because you have all of these national speakers coming to within a block of the State House where I work a good bit. And there was a particular session, Sam Alberry with Brett, and Trevin Wax, where they were talking about how do we live now, especially given the pressures, the rise of the sexual revolution. And it was just so relevant to the topic of this podcast. How do we live right now? And so I wanted to jump in with Brett, ask him about the messages of his most recent books, and then again, kind of how we can navigate this particular moment. So Brett, let's jump right in, just a little bit of your background and also your current position, what maybe your day-to-day activities look like.
Sure, yeah, I'll try to be quick with the background question. I am Midwestern, born and raised, but have lived out in California for 15 years. I worked for Biola University for about 9 years, which is a Christian university out here in Southern California. And I met my wife there. So my wife is a Southern California born and raised. She works at Biola in advancement fundraising. So we got to work together there for a few years. And then I was hired by the Gospel Coalition in 2017 to be senior editor. And so I've been there for almost 4 years now. And what I do there is a combination of editing articles written by a number of different authors on different topics, writing my own articles. I typically write on the intersection of faith and culture. So the arts, but also kind of cultural trends and issues, that the church is facing in culture. So I also work as the director of communications, I work with our media team and social media and video and podcasts. And, TGC is a multimedia content producer. So we've got a lot of irons in the fire in terms of producing content, and I've got my fingers in a lot of it. So it's a busy job, but super fulfilling. And it's great to be able to hopefully bless Christians all over the world with resources that help them think better about these issues, facing facing the church, facing individual Christians, everyday life. How does the gospel apply to all of that? So that's what we're about. And it's a fun job.
It's helpful. And so this may be the most important question of the podcast because my wife also grew up in California. Okay. So InNOut Burger, do you like InNOut? Because whenever we're back in California, I mean, I have to diet beforehand because we end up stopping there at least a couple of times during the trip. So it seems to be a fan favorite.
I'm probably not going to be popular for saying this, but I'm not a huge InNOut fan. I think it's like so much hype because it's like a novelty, right? It's only in California. Maybe there's a few locations in Arizona or other states, but I think it's more of a novelty act than actual like high quality. There's probably 3 or 4 like burger fast food restaurants I would put above InNOut.
So if anyone out there has written Brett off as heretical, just hold on. Okay, just wait. It's not about the burgers. So frankly, that was my opinion as well.
Yeah, it's kind of mediocre once you like actually taste it, but it's fun to like visit InNOut when you're in California because you don't get to have it often.
Absolutely. So we're going to do our best to repair our reputation with the audience here over the next little bit. But thanks for answering that one. So, but one of the things I've been thinking about over the last couple of years, I know many in the church have been thinking about it as well, but just the call to make disciples and how, despite all of the different programs that churches have, all of the real estate, all of the wealth, that question of, are we actually, making disciples? that
Mhm.
then go and make other disciples. And I think sometimes there's even a subconscious pursuit of comfort that
Mhm.
has affected the Western church's mission and even effectiveness in recent years. It seems like you might hold that opinion since you wrote a book about it.
Yeah.
So, what are some ways that maybe comfort has affected
Mhm.
the church in recent years?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think we basically, I think what has happened is in Western Christianity, is particularly maybe American Christianity, we live in a consumeristic culture. That's the framework through which most of life is looked at, through the lens of consumerism and what can I do? What do I want to make my life better, to make it easier? It's all about me, right? Have it your way, the McDonald's slogan. Like, um, it's the air we breathe in Western culture, and so we as Christians have adopted that mentality, and we've looked at church, we've looked at Christianity and discipleship and all of that through this lens of consumerism. So basically, it's become, what is this doing for me? Like when I go to a church, what do I get out of it? How does it serve me? How does it fit me, right? Just like any consumer product, you're looking for something that fits you, whether you're shopping for a pair of jeans or a new brand of toothpaste, right? We all have our preferences, we all have our favorites, and we shop for churches too, right? We kind of look for a church that fits checks all of our boxes, and then we stay in a church only as long as it keeps serving our needs and keeps kind of fitting us as we are. And I think that just gets Christianity fundamentally wrong, because Christianity is not about being served, right? Jesus said, serve, right? It's don't be served, serve. It's about taking up your cross and denying yourself and follow Jesus and sacrifice your best life, sacrifice your kind of perfect church ideal, and be more about God and what he's doing and the community he's forming. So yeah, I just think we've kind of fundamentally reformed Christianity in the image of consumerism rather than in the image of scriptural Christianity. And so that's really what it boils down to, and why I wrote the book, Uncomfortable.
So I think the most countercultural, despite even some of the issues we'll talk about a little later, the most countercultural statement that Christianity has to make is what you quoted already, Luke 9:23. If any man will come after me, let him deny himself,
Yep.
take up his cross daily and follow me. And to that, modern culture is like, what?
Yeah.
What are you
Right.
saying?
Yeah. The vast majority of the messages we hear in modern secular culture is the exact opposite of that. It's kind of find yourself, look within, follow your heart, live your truth. There's no concept of the self is something you would ever want to deny. Expressing yourself, following your desires to anywhere that they lead, like it's just the opposite of what Christianity calls us to. So, and we've gone off track as the church because I think we've kind of we've drunk that Kool-Aid a bit too much, so that now that's just subconsciously how we approach Christianity. We kind of want it to become, we're making Christianity in our own image, like, right? Like we kind of we twist the Bible into what we want it to say on certain issues. We go to churches that affirm us as we are, whether politically right or politically left. And it's just, yeah, it's a me-centric consumer approach to faith. It's not a deny myself for something bigger than myself approach to faith.
That's rich. And of course, it is difficult to look at somebody and even your own children or even in your own mind and say, I'm going to go do the hard thing today.
Yeah.
Like that's just not, I think, how we wake up and think about our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that proper kind of biblical view of comfort? And in what way should the Christian faith actually make us uncomfortable?
Yeah, I think the biblical view of comfort is like, there is comfort in eternal things, right? In our salvation that we have in Christ, and the promises that God makes that we have an eternal inheritance, right? There's there's plenty of comfort in the Christian life that it's not a bad thing to kind of take comfort in that. The unhealthy comfort, I think, is when we primarily orient our lives around earthly comfort and kind of those material comforts that we're, as fallen humans, I think we're naturally wired towards those comforts because we can touch them and feel them, and they're more tangible than the eternal kind of hope of heaven comfort. And so it's easy, it's understandable why we become entangled in the earthly comforts and trying to get as many material possessions as we can in our lives, and trying to build for ourselves the most comfortable houses and kingdoms that we can possibly create for ourselves. But ultimately, I mean, throughout the New Testament, Jesus is saying like that, all of that stuff is not where the kingdom is. That gets in the way of the kingdom of God. Like, so sell all your possessions, right? Like, disentangle yourself from worldly comforts. I am the only comfort you need, Jesus says, and he's constantly trying to hammer that home with his own disciples who are prone to want worldly power and worldly comfort as well. So I could go on and on about that idea because it's a big idea, but yeah, I'll stop there.
So, and we've applied it most specifically to the church, which I think is really important. But there's also an element of this because of intersection of faith and culture, where I think even the individual pursuit of comfort, our own wants and needs, can actually affect our public witness, where we only go into the public square. And I'm thinking specifically about religious liberty, framed as a sort of Christian favoritism rather than religious liberty for all people. And so, you know, talking about Jeremiah 29, even yesterday preaching at a church, talking about one of our distinctives is we should be citizens, caring not only for the good of ourselves, but for the good of all people. Now, that doesn't always win you points with a political tribe, in a sense. But then even as we carry over into public life, Jesus's concept of power, where instead of, you know, riding in on the warrior stallion, he rides in on the workman's donkey, as we celebrated in Palm Sunday. Would you speak a little bit to that? How do you see that kind of working out? And one of the reasons I want to connect with you is because I'm kind of working in the public square a good bit, trying to kind of hammer out what this looks like. I'm looking for sources like you and others to have kind of this theological foundation, kind of bedrock that we keep coming back to draw from, to make sure we're not going off too far in one direction or the other.
Yeah, man, there's a lot there. I mean, I love what you said about religious liberty and how it's unhealthy when our goal with religious liberty as Christians is primarily kind of the preservation of this kind of comfortable status quo where we can just continue to live our lives and not be harassed. Like, there's some degree of good in that idea, but the main important thing from my point of view with religious liberty is we want to preserve the ability of Christianity to function as Christianity in the world, not for ourselves, but for the world, right? Like for a missional purpose, for an eternal purpose that goes beyond our kind of temporal comfort. So the fight for religious liberty is not just about maintaining any sort of cultural status or cultural power or this kind of cushy, position in culture. No, it's about fighting for the preservation of Orthodox Christianity in a lived sense for the next generation, for the world, for those in the next generation who need to be able to see Christianity lived out in a robust way. They need to be able to see Christians working in different professions in a way where their faith is visible and not hidden away. So I think the point of religious liberty, as with anything in the Christian life, it needs to be about that eternal horizon of our mission in the world and what's going to be most helpful and effective for that mission, not about our own kind of, cushy, comfortable life and trying to preserve that.
That's helpful. And that's why I think, you can oppose something along the lines of the Equality Act, which would prevent a Christian organization from perpetuating its doctrine, essentially, and hiring individuals that would further that, but then would not stand against, say, a mosque coming into a town. Would I have disagreements? Just as I'm sure they'd have disagreements with me, right? But I would fight for the right of any organization, religious organization, to be treated equally, because it's, again, religious liberty for all people. So again, I don't claim to always have the right answers there. I may even get a few emails about that one.
There's lots of opinions on that idea right now.
But trying to work out that principle in public life of where we love our neighbors, seek the ability to pursue and proclaim the gospel, promote it to the next generation, but also figure out how to live well in an increasingly plural society.
Yeah.
That's helpful. So specifically, kind of back to the church, how does this uncomfortable Christianity, how should it make our churches uncomfortable? What are some things that should be distinctives of our church that kind of cut against the comfort seeking that we see in our culture?
Yeah, I mean, on a high level, just kind of a big picture philosophical level, I think that our churches should be more cruciform in shape. The cross and kind of the idea of sacrificing like Jesus and kind of serving and denying ourselves like Jesus, that should inform everything about our churches. So I think too many churches just don't like make the cross central to the way of life. And so it does become more about comfort and kind of being served. And, it perpetuates the consumerism idea where you invite people in, have some great coffee, send your kids to this polished children's, playground, and let's just have a really fun kind of country club experience. There's never any cost. There's never any ask. People aren't ever confronted in terms of like areas of their life that need to be sacrificed for the sake of pursuing Jesus. So I think on a high level, that's what I would say. In terms of getting down to the nitty gritty of what that looks like, I in the book, I have a chapter on like uncomfortable worship. I think this is one of the like areas where the rubber meets the road in terms of our consumer preferences, right? So many people either choose a church or leave a church because the worship style doesn't like serve them in the way they want to be served. It's not a perfect fit for their like particular, worship preferences. And so I think we as churches just need to like figure out how we can wean people off of that. Like, I come to church because the music style is exactly what I want, or I hate the church because of the music style. It's the opposite. Like, so maybe it's good to kind of have a diversity of worship styles. So on any given Sunday, like some people are really happy about the song, the like style. Some people are like uncomfortable about it, but then you flip it and the next Sunday it's more traditional hymns. And so the young people are a little uncomfortable by that. And so just, I think with worship or anything with style and the way that you do church, it needs to be less about kind of serving a particular demographic or kind of what does the audience want, and more about like, how can we be a church that focuses on Jesus and God and tries to do all this in a way that puts him in the spotlight. And at times it might make us uncomfortable, but that's okay. I also think, homogeneity in churches is a problem that is born out of our consumeristic obsession with comfort. You go to church with people who are like you naturally. That's the consumer inclination, because you don't want to have to rub shoulders with people who are very different from you, whether ethnicity or generationally or politically. So you have a lot of churches these days who are very homogenous in one way or the other, whether they're all 20-something hipsters who are homogenous church, or they're all octogenarians, with an organist, and that's a homogenous church community. You have churches that are very homogenous politically, where like if you're a Republican and you went to that church and you said out loud that you were a Republican, you would be like, run out the door, and the same with the other side. And so I think that's just a problem, right? Like homogenous church communities are a problem on a number of levels, not least of which is the level of it just goes completely against the biblical vision in the New Testament, right? Paul in his epistles was constantly fighting against this tendency of Jews to want to do their kind of version of Christianity and Gentiles doing their own thing, and like socially more well-off people acting one way and not wanting to mingle with the lower classes. And so it was Paul who had to make those points that like there's neither Jew or Gentile, there's not, nor, you know, male or female, like we're all one here. So let's act like it, and let's be intentional about kind of building communities that represent the diversity that only the cross of Christ can create, right? Only Jesus can unite people across all these divides. And if we're kind of intentionally not pursuing that, I think it's just fundamentally missing a huge part of the gospel vision. So that's probably one of the most uncomfortable things these days for churches to lean into, is actively pursuing and cultivating a diverse family together. But man, if there's one way that we can embrace discomfort in a beautiful way that is going to show the rest of the world something that they don't see often, which is a unified diversity in community, then that's a great opportunity that we have.
That's helpful. And I suppose all of that has to start kind of right here in my own heart, right? That every Christian really has to start there before you critique others.
Absolutely.
You know, how many times have we gone into a church and thought, too traditional, too progressive? And I was sitting with a pastor recently who mentioned kind of this rift over, you know, more traditional worship and service styles, more progressive, not theologically progressive, but methodologically progressive. And that those that had kind of broken off had almost adopted the same kind of tribe mentality that those that were still more traditional had. And his encouragement was, we should just focus on a relationship with Jesus. But there was one other piece of this I thought that was extremely countercultural, is important, and that was the idea of an uncomfortable commitment. That, and I forget, it was you or another Gospel Coalition writer was talking about how we live in non-places. So, you know, you go to Starbucks, you have an individualized cup, but you don't know the barista. We don't know the person down the street anymore. And that's a beautiful part of the church that we often kind of run away from rather than embrace.
Yeah, I mean, I think commitment is one of the most countercultural things for anyone to do in today's kind of distracted FOMO age, where there's so many options, right? There's more options than any generation of humans has ever had. We're constantly being bombarded on our phones with like this distraction and that distraction and this thing happening on the other side of the world that can consume our passions, or this community that's forming on some corner of the blogosphere that I could kind of be a part of. And so I think it results in just a naturally fickle, restless kind of way of living in the world, where we just float from thing to thing. And in the same way, almost like we scroll through our phones, right? It's like something catches our interest for a minute, but then we move on and we keep moving on. And no one ever sticks with anything for long enough to actually be changed by it. And the same is true, I've found, in this generation of church commitment. It's really sad to see how the larger kind of FOMO, fickle, mentality is now informing how people relate to church communities. Like, people go for a year or two at a church, and then something changes in their life, or they, get a job offer in some other part of the country, and just like that, they're gone, and they don't ever think twice about it. I'm not saying there's never valid reasons to leave a church community. There certainly are, but I find that we come and go far too easily. We don't we don't think of church commitment nearly as deeply as we should. Like, the Bible speaks of covenant in terms of God's people in the same way like a marriage covenant should work, right? It's a serious commitment. Like, and when you commit to a church, you have to be able to like have some grit. You have to be able to like stick with your church community for better or worse, right? In sickness and health, just like a marriage, because in any marriage, inevitably you go through seasons where you're a little bit less kind of in it as you were in the beginning, and it kind of ebbs and flows. And the only thing that keeps it going oftentimes is the commitment that you've made. And with church, it's the same way. There's going to be seasons with all of us, with whatever church we've committed to, where we're just kind of disillusioned with it, or we're not feeling it anymore. Our heart's not in it. And the worldly consumeristic approach would say at that point, okay, now it's time to leave. I'm not feeling it anymore. So let's try another church. And far too often, that's how we operate. We just kind of float around from place to place. And again, we never really grow much, because growth requires time. It requires roots going down deeper and deeper so that what is above ground bears more fruit. And you just can't do that when you're uprooting yourself constantly every few years and going from community to community.
That's a good word. And I think a key way that we can show how Christianity is countercultural. So on page 34, you wrote, when the Christian church is comfortable and cultural, she tends to be weak. When she's uncomfortable and countercultural, she tends to be strong. And so what are some ways that maybe the church can lean into that? And I was trying to remember if it was you or Trevin. I believe it was you that said something along the lines during discussion at the conference of, we need to make self-discipline, or perhaps to frame it differently, being uncomfortable cool again.
Yeah.
Like to show people the beauty of it's not just an endless flow of Netflix options. Right. It's not, actually putting boundaries on our desires. And so what are maybe some ways that churches could practically do that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it is one of my like overarching messages, and so much of what I write is that we need to become more comfortable being uncomfortable, being a peculiar people as Christians in this secular world, like being a little bit marginalized for our beliefs, being odd, being strange. It's not that we should go out of our way to like be jerks or like be kind of crazy Christians. I'm not at all suggesting that, but it's just true that for various reasons, our beliefs as Christians, like our community, like the things I've just been talking about, this idea of like committing to a family of diverse people, old, young, every ethnicity, like every socioeconomic, and then doing life with them, committing to them over a long period of time. Like, that's just weird. Like, who does that? Like, so there's a lot of aspects of Christianity that just at their core are going to make us a little bit weird. And that should be actually appealing to us. It should be cool, like to be part of a movement which throughout history for 2,000 years has been this largely kind of on the margins, like persecuted movement. And of course, there's been seasons in history, Christian history, where the church has become synonymous with power and kind of culture. And like I said in that quote that you just referenced in the book, I think that a lot of times those tend to be the times when Christianity becomes the weakest, because it becomes a little bit too comfortable with the culture and political power and government power, and it kind of loses itself a little bit. Its prophetic voice is lost. But insofar as Christian communities all over the world, in whatever context they're in, can kind of discover their identity primarily as being this countercultural Sermon on the Mount identity, where it's a reversal of the world's values on so many fronts. And it calls us away from worldly grasping of power. It calls us away from the self-centric kind of consumeristic posture, which is so natural for fallen humans. It calls us to all these countercultural things, and that's true wherever you are in history, wherever you are in the world. And so I think that what I would challenge Christians to do is just wherever you are in your context, like find those areas where you're tempted to kind of distort Christianity to fit into some, norm in your culture, or something that's associated with power, and ask yourself, how is Jesus actually calling me to zig where the culture around me is zagging? And then how can I just challenge myself to bear that cost and bear that burden, and do it in community with a community of other people who are committed to counting the cost. It's easier to count the cost in community, right? Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who literally wrote the book on counting the cost of Christianity, the cost of discipleship. He also wrote a book called Life Together, which is all about the beauty and the importance of Christian community. And so the two go together, right? Self-denial, sacrificial, cruciform Christianity is really only possible in community with a kind of ragged band of Christ followers from all walks of life who are willing to be persecuted, who are willing to be different and be weird for the sake of Jesus and for the glory of God, and to do it together.
Excellent. And I think a great example of that is certainly the issue of the sexual revolution, the LGBTQ movement. And as we kind of launch into that, I was mentioned at the beginning, a breakout session with you, Sam Mulberry, Trevin Wax, on how do we respond to that. Mm-hmm. And you opened up with a story that I thought was such a highlight of how you're even doing this in your own life, especially in the context of where you live. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you mind sharing the story. I believe you were discipling a young man at a Starbucks. And, comfortable sharing that.
Yeah, I was with two young guys who go to my church, who are probably in their early 20s. And we were at a coffee shop sitting outside, and we were having a conversation about cancel culture, and how for conservative Christians in California, and particularly in the film industry, because one of these two guys that I was meeting with works as an actor in the film industry. And he was saying, like, if it were to become known in his profession that he was like a conservative evangelical Christian who believed what the Bible teaches on sexuality, that he would be afraid of like being canceled, like never being able to actually work in Hollywood if that became known. And so we were just talking through that reality of like being a faithful Christian on sexual ethics in today's world. If you say it, in certain circles, you could be ostracized, and you could literally have your livelihood removed. And so as we were talking about this, it was outside in a coffee shop with people kind of around us. And, you never know in coffee shops if anyone is eavesdropping in your conversations. You kind of hope that they aren't, because it's a little weird. But so a guy who was sitting at the table next to us, he literally just stood up and came up to us and very angrily said, "I cannot listen to you guys talk anymore. I'm leaving." And we were all, the three of us were just like frozen. We were like, what just happened? Like, first of all, he was listening to all that, and what did we say? Like, did we say something we shouldn't have said? And as we just kind of talked through that incident, it was like, no, we didn't. All we said was that this is a real dynamic for Christians in the world, and we could get canceled for saying what we believe. And literally it kind of happened right in that coffee shop where someone couldn't even be near that conversation. So I just thought that was a really, it shook me, because it was like I'd never experienced that before, but it was just a reminder of like, wow, like this is the dynamic we're in, where it's going to be hard to do relationship with people in our world who they can't even be near people who believe what the Bible says on sexuality. Like, it's just so abhorrent that they literally have to leave the room. So it just shows what we're up against, I think.
So any thoughts on, and that's such a powerful story, proving that even being winsome, because I'm sure you were not there verbally beating anyone up,
Yeah.
castigating anyone. You were
Yeah.
just talking about the truths of Scripture and how to faithfully live it out. So that being winsome in this culture isn't going to be enough to avoid censure.
No.
But any other thoughts on how ministry leaders and other committed Christians can navigate this issue? They're not going to be out there screaming, holding signs, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Want to do this in a gospel-centered, faithful way.
Yeah.
Any thoughts or ideas for those Christians?
Yeah. I mean, I think, like you just said, like we shouldn't like be out on the street corner with bullhorns. Like we don't want to be needlessly hostile or aggressive, but we need to be unashamed, and we need to be willing to like speak the truth and give answers when asked, in a winsome way, in a way that isn't embarrassed by what the Bible says. We need to own it. We need to see it as beautiful. We need to recognize that this isn't just a truth that we should kind of begrudgingly accept, God's vision for sexuality. It's too important to just kind of like assent to because you have to as a Christian. And I think that this is honestly probably the biggest area where we as the church need to do better in the next generation, is educating people, catechizing people to not just kind of know what the Bible says about sexuality, but see it as something beautiful, and kind of seeing the big vision in a way that like actually like you personalize it as something beautiful. Because if we don't see it as beautiful, then how are we going to be able to like make it at all beautiful to a culture that currently sees it as abhorrent and ugly and just, bigoted and horrible. So so I think the best way forward in terms of our external engagement on this issue, I think, is starting internally and getting our own house in order in terms of making sure we all understand what the Bible says, but also making sure we all love it, and that we can kind of communicate it beautifully to one another within Christian communities. And then eventually, hopefully, we can communicate it in a compelling way externally as well.
And I thought that was one of the most powerful things you said at the breakout, because it is like the Christian sexual ethic is kind of the problem kid in the family of biblical doctrines. It's like, he doesn't come out in public very much, and shifting that from, fully understanding the consequences, but still believing that it's both true and good. Something our culture needs. That's so important. So thank you for that. I want to shift gears here as we come to a close. Your most recent book is The Wisdom Pyramid, and how Christians can find wisdom rather than just information. And I love that you're an editor. We were talking a little bit about this beforehand. God did not create me to edit. I write, and I need help with that. And so I'm grateful for your role in helping people really make Christian truth concise, digestible for people. It sounds like this is kind of one of the elements of the book. So how are you encouraging Christians to not just be consumed by social media, all of the different problems, and to pursue wisdom rather than just information overload?
Yeah. I mean, one of the big ideas of this book is that as we have more and more information in the information age, it becomes harder and harder to have wisdom, right? Because I think too much information and too many voices and too much just chaotic things that are like bouncing around our minds, which is what's happening, I think, in the digital age and the internet age. It's just not conducive to wisdom. And so a healthy kind of audit of your intakes of what actually is feeding your mind and your soul is so important in order to gain wisdom. So really what the wisdom pyramid is about is, it's playing off of the food pyramid in terms of our physical health, which is it's a guide for what food groups are going to be more conducive to your physical health and what are going to be less important. And I'm applying that to our kind of spiritual diet in this overly glutted information landscape where there's way too much vying for our attention and trying to grab at our heart on any given day. How can we be more careful and more intentional about cultivating a diet that's conducive to wisdom? So each category or level of the wisdom pyramid, and you'll have to kind of look up the graphic to kind of see the visual for what I'm talking about here. But each level, starting from the bottom and going up, is like the more important categories for your wisdom, and then the least. So I have the Bible at the bottom because that's God's eternal word to us. It's the only infallible truth that there is in the world. So of course it needs to be the most important, most nourishing source that we fill our minds with on a daily basis, hopefully. Yeah. And then in the top category of the wisdom pyramid, which is the fats, oils, and sweets category of the food pyramid, the use sparingly, category that's where I put the internet and social media. So it's not like I'm suggesting we should never go online or go on social media. I think it can be a source of wisdom for us, but it has to be in its proper place. It has to be kind of used sparingly, used carefully, because if it becomes the staple of our diet, which it is in our culture, like most people are actually building their knowledge diets around the internet these days. And we're seeing the effects of it. It's making us unwise. It's making us foolish. And so we have to reverse that order. We have to put digital content and the internet in its proper place and look to better sources to feed our soul.
And amen to that. And how many days we just find ourselves comparing ourselves to everyone else, trying to care for all the people in the world. And so great book, and maybe pun intended, we'll just whet your appetite here for the wisdom pyramid, and we will link to both books we've mentioned in the show notes. I found it very helpful, just even the concept of being more intentional on that.
Yeah.
So Brett, any kind of meaningful moments of late where you've seen God working in your efforts, your ministry efforts?
I think just releasing this book, The Wisdom Pyramid, a couple months ago, and just the feedback I've been getting from random people who are reading it. People message me on Instagram and tell me how much they've enjoyed it and how their church is going through it together and finding it so helpful. Parents have messaged me saying like, thank you for writing this. I'm having my kids read it, and they have grown up in the digital era, so the smartphone is really their window to the world. It is the primary thing that's feeding their soul. And so I think that's just really affirmative to get kind of that feedback. And whenever you write a book, it's a vulnerable thing because you don't know how it's going to be received, and you don't know if it's going to have the intended effect of helping people and blessing people. But so far, in the first couple months of this book being out there, the feedback I'm getting is really encouraging. So that I thank God for that, because it feels like Him kind of blessing this book now that it's out there. So,
well, I'm grateful for you applying your talents to writing it. I know the concept's been helpful to me. I'm sure it's going to be helpful to many. Writing a book is certainly one of the hardest things I've ever done, and so I'm grateful you took the time to condense that into a book format and help us out.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm grateful for, we're talking a little bit about this when we jumped on for the Gospel Coalition, is you have so many different people in different parts of the country looking at what's going on with your life experiences, your kind of cultural context, and saying, what does living out the gospel, proclaiming it, look like right now? So I'm grateful for your perspective today. I found it very helpful. So kind of last question. If you had a billboard on which you could put a message to kind of the Big C gospel preaching church, what would you put on it?
I think we've circled around this idea in part of this conversation already, but I would probably just put up the Bible verse, the quote from Jesus where He says, if anyone would follow me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. I think that's kind of the kernel of Christianity, the Christian life in a nutshell, that cruciform shape that I've been talking about. and yet it's probably the most under practiced. It's probably the thing that we take the least seriously when the rubber meets the road in our own lives. So I think if all of us just checked our hearts and asked, like, what in my life can I actually deny for the sake of Christ? What cross can I carry? I think that's going to solve or help us solve a lot of the problems we're facing. Tim Keller tweeted something this weekend that I thought was so insightful, and he was making connections between the kind of traditionally conservative stance on biblical sexual ethics and the traditionally progressive stance on justice, kind of pursuing social justice and biblical justice. And he was saying that, like, don't let the world divide you, Christians. Like, realize that both of these, the biblical sexual ethic and the biblical pursuit of justice, they come from the same, they're cut from the same cloth. And that cloth is Jesus-like self-denial and sacrifice. So the biblical sexual ethic, on one hand, requires that, right? In order to be monogamous with one man and one woman in a covenantal relationship for an entire lifetime, that requires sacrifice. That requires self-denial, right? To make that work. So that's the biblical sexual ethic. It requires that. The biblical justice ethic also requires, like, self-denial and sacrifice and giving a little bit of what you feel like is rightfully yours for the sake of the other, and kind of sacrificing your cultural preferences maybe for the sake of building a diverse community, which we've talked about a little bit today. That requires sacrifice. That requires taking up your cross a bit. And so I just thought that was helpful, that, like, both of these issues, which tend to draw people to one side or the other, they're really coming from the same central Christian idea of sacrifice, right? Deny yourself for the sake of others. On the other side of that choice is flourishing community, right? A flourishing marriage happens when both parties sacrifice and deny themselves. A flourishing, diverse cultural community in a church happens when everyone comes at it from this primary position of denying myself out of love, sacrificial love for the other. So that's a long answer to your billboard question, but I think that's the key nugget that I think the church needs to hear.
Oh, and that's so rich, hard to do. While you were talking, just how countercultural it is to tell somebody you should pick up your cross rather than to pick up your crown, right? And how, especially, how does that work out in this specific arena of life?
Yeah,
where we are also trained just to have our own way, pursue our own things, and yes, we should pursue biblical principles because they're good for all people. But there can be a fine line where that switches over into our own self-interest, and so coming back to that verse is going to be helpful to us. So,
absolutely.
Brett, thanks for taking so much of your time today. You've given me a lot to chew on, even personally. I look forward to our listeners being able to listen to this and get a little uncomfortable. So thanks again, Brett.
Good. Yeah. Thank you.